Hi guys, so I hope you enjoyed your long weekend. Today what we're going to be doing is we are moving on to lesson 7.3, which is factoring x squared plus bx plus c. Now, one of your exit tickets for last class was to answer that question on using x squared plus 5x plus 6. I went through and graded all of them. Some of you had some really great answers and you really thought about how you were to factor it. We're going to go through on how to do it today. Some of you were pretty much on the right track. You just needed a little guidance. So if you look at all my comments, you'll be able to see where you were at with that. But after today, you guys will fully understand how to do it. So please make sure you watch the video. There will be an assignment for you to complete at the end. But going through it. So we are going to be able to factor our quadratic trinomials of the form x squared plus bx plus c. Remember, it's considered a quadratic because of that 2. So back in chapter 6, you learned how to multiply two binomials using the distributive property or the FOIL method. In this lesson, we're going to use those skills in order to factor a trinomial into two binomials. So before, you were given like x plus 3 and then x plus 2, and you would FOIL it. And when you FOIL this, you get x squared plus 5x plus 6. Hint, there's the answer from that exit ticket. So what we're going to be doing now is, instead of starting here and ending with this result, we're now going to start here and we're going to try to get this as the end result. So this is going to be the first thing we're given and we're trying to get to there. So essentially, it's just working backwards. So notice that when you multiply x plus 2 and x plus 5, the constant term in the trinomial is the product of the constants in the binomial. So what they're talking about are these last terms here. It's that term in the trinomial. You can use this fact to factor a trinomial into its binomial factors by looking for two numbers that are factors of it, okay? And what you're going to do is just write two binomials with those numbers and then multiply to see if you're correct. So we're going to go through some examples. I think it's just easier to go through the examples versus just listening to all the words and try to explain it. But remember, you're trying to find factors of this number that will give you that middle term. So remember, when you multiply two binomials, you have FOIL, which is first terms, outer terms, inner terms, and the last terms. The guess and check method is usually not the most effective here, meaning don't try to guess what these two numbers are and then just check using FOIL. Sometimes it could take you a long time in order to get to the correct answer. So just remember that the coefficient, meaning the number in front of the middle term, is the sum of your factors. So this 7 is the sum of my factors of 12. Okay, so we're going to list factors of 12 to add up and give us 7. And then here's just the general form showing listing all your factors, checking the sums. So let's just jump into it. But before I get there are multiple ways of being able to factor x squared plus bx plus c. It's not always going to be plus c, and it's not always going to be plus bx there. What we're going to be looking at today is we're just going to be looking at when c is positive to start out with. We are going to get into it when c is going to be negative, meaning it's going to change the sign of your factors. So when c is positive, your factors are going to have the same sign, because remember, factors, they have to multiply together. So if I have a positive number, that means I can either have two positive factors or you can have two negative factors, okay? It's not like you could have one or the other, because two positives multiplied together give you a positive and two negatives also give you a positive. Now, when the middle term is positive, both of your factors are positive. When the middle term is negative, both of your factors are negative. Okay, because remember, the middle term is the sum. So if C is positive, you have either plus plus or minus minus. Now, B negative goes with the minus minus. B positive goes with plus plus. Okay? Let's look at trying it. And I think it's just going to be easier as we go through it. And remember, we are going to practice more with this on Monday. So if you don't get it today, don't worry. We will take the time and work with it on Monday as well. So, factor each trinomial, check your answer. Checking your answer, we're going to use the FOIL method. So, what we're going to do now is you first start out with your last term, okay, which is 5. I need to list my factors of 5, okay? Now, factors of 5, I could either have positive 5 times positive 1, or I know I could have negative 5 times negative 1. However, my middle term is also positive. So because of that, that means my sum also has to be positive. So now you're going to find the sum of both of these numbers. Well, the sum of 5 and 1 is 5 plus 1, which gives me 6. And then the sum of negative 5 and negative 1 is negative 6. So that means negative 6 cannot work because I need a positive value here, meaning the factors that I'm going to be using are 5 and 1. So when you're solving these problems, what I always suggest that you do is you draw yourself 2 sets of parentheses to start. Now, the term that goes in the first spot of your parentheses is always just going to be the terms that will multiply and give you this term here. Well, starting out, we're going to start out with the simple basic of just x squared. So you know x times x gives you x squared. So both of the terms in your parentheses starting out are going to have to be x. And that's the case with any variable that's raised to the second power there that's starting out your trinomial. It's always just going to be x times x, y times y. If it's L squared, it's going to be L times L, okay? That's always just going to be the first term there. Now, they both end up being positive factors. One is a 5, and then the other one's a 1. And you would just write it like that. Now, we do have to check our work. So in order to check it, you're just going to simply do FOIL. So checking it, x times x is x squared. X times 1 is just 1x. X times 5 is 5x. X times 1 is 5. Combine your like terms here, so you end up with x squared plus 1x and 5x gives me 6x plus 5. Double checking, is that what I had up here? It is, so I know I factored this correctly by getting x plus 5 times the quantity of x plus 1. So the 5 and the 1 come from the factors of the last term of your trinomial. And then you always need to make sure that the sum of those factors gives you your middle term. All right, let's say we try another one together. So I need to factor x squared plus 6x plus 9. So the first thing you're going to want to do is list your factors of 9. So looking at it, factors of 9, and if you guys want to right away, you have positive 9, positive 6, meaning you're limited to just the positive factors here. So you have 1 times 9, and then the other factor is 3 times 3. So checking the sum, 1 times 9 is 10. 3 times 3 is 9. Or 3 plus 3 is 6. Remember, you're trying to find the sum, not multiplying. Well, 10 wasn't the number that was in the middle, but 6 is. So that means writing my 2 sets of parentheses, meaning my 2 binomials. You have x and x. Your middle term's positive, so you know this has to be positive because your last term is a positive number, and you have 3 and 3. Checking your work. X times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 3 is 9. Combining like terms, you get x squared plus 6x plus 9, which is what I started with. Now, if you want to get fancy, since it was 2 of the same binomials, you could rewrite that as x plus 3 quantity squared. Because remember, these two mean the same thing. This is just the simplified version. All right, let's look at another one. So I have x squared minus 8x plus 15. Looking at the last term, it's positive, meaning I need signs of the same number, meaning either 2 positives or 2 negatives. So then I look at my middle term. It's negative now, meaning I need 2 signs that are going to end up being negative. So this part right here is not correct. It should be 2 negatives. So, listing the factors of 15. So, I could have negative 1 times negative 15. I could have negative 3 times negative 5. And then the factors would just repeat. So checking the sums, negative 1 plus negative 15 gives me negative 16, which is not what I have. Negative 3 plus negative 5 is negative 8, which is what my middle term is. So writing my 2 sets of parentheses, you have x and x, 3 and 5, and they're negative, so it's subtracting now. Then if you check your work, you have x times x, x squared, x times negative 5, negative 5x, negative 3 times x, negative 3x, negative 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. Combine your like terms, you get x squared minus 8x. Nope, this should be a plus 15 at the end because the negative times the negative. So then this is plus 15. Looking up at what I started with, that matches up. So I solved it correctly. Okay. So if some of you are at the point right now where you're realizing what the factors are going to be, that is fine. You don't have to list out the table like this. But I will say it will help you when we get into larger numbers with a middle term. That's not something so easy that you can think of. So I'm going to have you guys try 4 you-try problems. I will write all the correct answers for you guys to see. And then you guys can check your work. So pause the video right now and then try the 4 you-try problems. All right, guys, here's the answer to your first you-try. The quantity of x plus 2 times the quantity of x plus 6. Example 2, the quantity of x minus 2 times the quantity of x minus 3, because that middle term was negative, so both terms have to be negative. The third one, x plus 6 times the quantity of x plus 7. And then your last and final one is the quantity of x minus 5 times the quantity of x minus 8. And again, it's all because of that middle term being negative and the last term being positive. Okay, so now that's when you have it with being the same signs, okay? Sometimes it might end up where you're going to have different signs. So in that case, that is going to occur when C is negative. So that occurs when that last term of the trinomial is negative, meaning the signs are going to be opposite. So you're going to have a positive and you're going to have a negative. Now, the sign of B tells you which factor is positive and which factor is going to be negative. So if B is a large positive, okay, so let's just say B is positive, that means your positive number is the larger number and your negative number is the smaller number. Meaning, like, I could have, like, 13 and, like, negative 4, okay? Because 13 is the larger number there. Meaning, my middle term is going to be positive. Because, remember, you're finding the sum of these two to get that middle term. Now, if B is negative, that means that your positive number was the smallest number. So, it's the smaller one. And the negative number is the larger one. So in this case, like, you could have your smaller number being 2 and your larger number being negative 8. So when you add them together, you get negative 6, which produces that negative value for the middle term. Okay? So it's really important that you pay attention to what your middle term is. Is it positive? Is it negative? Okay? And again, that C value tells you if I'm going to have the same signs or if I'm going to have different signs. So, looking at the first example, factoring x squared plus bx plus c when c is negative. So, looking at your last term, you have a negative 20, which tells you automatically you need opposite signs, okay? So, you know you need one positive and one negative term. Now, you have to look at that middle term right there. It's positive, which tells me that my larger term has to be the positive number and my smaller term is going to be the negative number. So, looking at the last term, you need factors of it. So, let's just worry about listing the factors of those numbers. So, factors of negative 20. Well, you know the positive number has to be the larger number. So, factors of negative 20 could be 20 times negative 1. You could have 2 and 10, meaning 10 would be the larger one and negative 2. 3 can't go into it. You can have 4 and 5. Well, 5 is the larger number, so 5 would have to be positive and the 4 would have to be negative. And then your factors would just repeat. So finding the sum now, 20 plus negative 1 is 19, which isn't what I had. 10 and negative 2 gives me 8, which is not my middle term. And then 5 and negative 4, which is 1, which is what my middle term is. So writing your two sets of parentheses now for your binomials, you have x squared, so your first term is going to be x. And then your last term, you have positive 5. And then the other one's a negative 4. So you have x plus 5 times the quantity of x minus 4. And like before, you can check your work. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. X times 5 or 5 times x is 5x. X times negative 4 is negative 20. Combine your like terms now. You have x squared minus or plus x minus 20, which is what I started with. Okay, so it's really important to pay attention to your B and your C values now so you know what values you need for your factors. All right, looking at the next one here. You have a negative C value, which tells you need a positive and a negative value, and your middle terms ends up being negative. So your negative term has to be the larger number. Your positive term is the smaller number. So listing factors of 18, you have 1 and 18. Well, the negative number has to be the larger number, so it would be 1 times negative 18. You have 2 and 9. 9's the larger one, so it has to be negative. You have 3 and 6, so 6 has to be the larger one. 4, 5, and then it's just going to repeat. So checking your sums, this gives you negative 17, which doesn't work. 2 and negative 9 is negative 7, which isn't what I'm looking for. 3 and negative 6 is negative 3, which is exactly what I want. So writing my two binomials, I get x plus 3 times the quantity of x minus 6. And as always, guys, you can check your work. But again, can't stress enough how important it is to pay attention to those signs of those numbers. It's going to tell you what you're going to need for your factors. So, one helpful hint for you guys is if you have trouble remembering the rules for which factor is positive and which one is negative, you can try all of your factor pairs and then just check their sums, okay? So again, I'm going to ask that you guys pause the video and you try some new tries. You guys have 3 of them this time. So pause the video right now and try and make sure you check your work. All right, and here are your answers. One thing I haven't mentioned is it doesn't matter what order you put the binomials in as long as you have them in, as long as you have the same numbers, that's all that matters with the signs, okay? But it doesn't matter, like I could write it as x minus 3 times the quantity of the x plus 5, okay? Remember, multiplication is the commutative property, so either or, it doesn't matter. Example 2, you have the quantity of x minus 4 times the quantity of x plus 2. And then the last one, you have the quantity of x minus 10 times the quantity of x plus 2. As always, guys, if you're having trouble, please make sure you send me a message and I'd be happy to help you or come to my office hours. So, getting into the last part now, a polynomial and the factored form of the polynomial are considered equivalent expressions. Just like if you were working with 3 times the quantity of x plus 2, you would say that's equivalent to 3x plus 6, okay? So if I have x plus 3 times the quantity of x plus 2, that's equivalent to x squared plus 5x plus 6. When you evaluate these two expressions for the same value of the variable, your results are the same. So we're going to be evaluating expressions now and simply just plugging in values for our expressions and simplifying. So what we're going to have to do first is they want us to factor y squared plus 10y plus 21. And then they want us to show that the original polynomial and the factored form have the same value for n is equal to these 5 numbers. So first you're going to have to factor this trinomial here. Well, looking at your last term, it's positive, meaning you have the same signs, either plus plus or negative negative. Middle term is positive, meaning I only need 2 positive numbers. So I think we should be at the point now where we're almost to the point where we can do it just like this. So you know you need 2 positives. Factors of 21 that give you 10. Well, thinking about it, 7 and 3 is a factor of 21. When I add them, they give me 10. So that means I have to have 7 and 3 here. So that's step 1. Step 2 now is to evaluate your polynomials. So what you're going to do is you're going to plug in this value of 0 for each one of them and then evaluate. So if I plug it in, you have 0 plus 7 times 0 plus 3. Simplifying, this just becomes 7 times 3, which gives me 21. If I evaluate over here, y squared, so that gives me 0 squared, plus 10 times 0 plus 21. Well, this is 0 plus 0 plus 21, which just gives me 21. So both of them are good with each other. So what we're going to do right now is I'm just going to pause the video, and I want you guys to just do the same process right now because, again, it's just evaluating an expression that we've done multiple times throughout the course of the year. So I'm going to pause it and I'm going to do the work, and I want for you guys to do the same thing. All right, guys, so there you have it. If you notice, when I evaluate either the 2 binomials or the trinomial, I still end up getting the same value for the polynomial or the binomial, okay? So when you evaluate these, you should end up getting the same result because remember, they are equivalent expressions of one another. So, if you guys want to try the you try problem, go for it. I think you guys are pretty familiar now with evaluating expressions, so I'm going to just skip over it as if we were in the classroom. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is what you guys need to accomplish by the end of Friday. So this is the end of lesson 7.3. We're going to spend a little bit more time practicing with 7.3 on Monday. And then you guys are going to review and take a quiz on Friday. Okay. But for today, you guys need to complete page 476, number 2 through 16 even out of your textbook, and then submit your answers on Schoology by 11:59 Friday night. And like I said, you're having a 7.1 to 7.3 quiz on Friday. Please also make sure that if you have any missing assignments for me, that you make them up by Friday as well. I need all past due work in by Friday. Otherwise, it will be counted as a 0 and there will be no making of it up. So double check your grade books. I do have assignments labeled as missing if I have not received them yet. But other than that, guys, please make sure you do your textbook work and have a great weekend.